the last class we discussed the cockroach up to locomotion. In this class we have to discuss the remaining part of cockroach including the mouth parts, harmful and useful insects. As usual, before going to the systems, we have to discuss 1 or 2 points regarding the concerned system. Now as we observe the digestive system of cockroach, in the digestive system of cockroach, alimentary canal and digestive glands are present. If alimentary canal and digestive glands are present, that is called a complete digestive system. As we observe the digestive system of cockroach, in the digestive system, the alimentary canal here and there is coiled. But in case of earthworm, the alimentary canal length is equal to that of the length of body. So in the body of earthworm, the alimentary canal is straight, whereas in case of cockroach, the length of alimentary canal is longer than that of the length of body. So that in the body of cockroach, the alimentary canal here and there is coiled. Now what are the parts in the alimentary canal? What are the digestive glands in the alimentary canal? We are discussing all these points concerned with the bits. Now we have to discuss the first bit. This is the only part of the alimentary canal which is lined by endodermal cells. Again repeating the question. This is the only part of the alimentary canal which is lined by endodermal cells. Now, as we observe the alimentary canal of cockroach, the second part of alimentary canal we call it as the midgut. Here MG means midgut. What is the other name of midgut? The other name of midgut is the mesenteron. In the midgut, a tubular part is present called ventriculus. Now as we observe the midgut is the longest straight part. As we observe the midgut is lined by what type of cells? They are called endodermal, the gland cells. Now again it is repeating. As we observe the alimentary canal of cockroach, in the alimentary canal of cockroach, what is the straight and longest part? That is midgut. What is the other name of midgut? The mesenteron. In the midgut, a tubular part is present that is called ventriculus. This is the only part of midgut lined inside by endodermal gland cells. In the midgut, there is no ectoderm. There is no chitinous cuticle. So the walls of midgut are thin. These endodermal gland cells act as the digestive glands. Now, regarding this question, this is the only part of alimentary canal which is lined by endodermal cells. Option 1, proctodium. Second one, stomodium. Third one, mesenteron. Fourth one, coprodium. Now based on this information, what is the correct answer? The mesenteron. Now go for the next question. Now the number of Malpighian tubules. Now as we observe the alimentary canal of cockroach, here the question is the number of Malpighian tubules. Now this part we call it as the midgut. Now this is the posterior part of midgut. The opening of posterior part is controlled by a muscle sphincter. Now in the hindgut, this part we call it as the ileum. It is followed by the colon, followed by rectum, opens out through anus. Now in between posterior part of midgut, anterior part of hindgut, or between posterior part of midgut and ileum of hindgut, what are present? The Malpighian tubules are present. As we observe the Malpighian tubules are yellow in color. The Malpighian tubules explained by Marcello Malpighi. Now as we observe the Malpighian tubules, now you have to observe the diagram. The Malpighian tubules open into the ileum. The Malpighian tubules derived from what type of germ layer? The ectoderm. What is the primary? This symbol indicates primary. What is the primary function of Malpighian tubules? That is osmoregulation. Now, what is the second function of Malpighian tubules? Excretion. Regarding EAPCET examination, what is the main function of Malpighian tubules? Go for excretion. In addition to the excretion, the Malpighian tubules also perform osmoregulation. And now, what are the excretory organs attached to alimentary canal? The Malpighian tubules. The Malpighian tubules are arranged in how many bundles? 6 bundles. In each bundle, near about 15 Malpighian tubules are present. It means total number of bundles is 6. In each bundle, near about 15 Malpighian tubules. Totally 19 Malpighian tubules. They are arranged in 6 bundles. Now, the question is the number of Malpighian tubules. One is 6 bundles, 4 bundles, 3 bundles and 5 bundles. Now, based on this information, the correct answer is 6 bundles. Now, go for the next question. Long coiled tube of hindgut. Now, the question is the long coiled tube of hindgut. Now, as we observe the alimentary canal, this part we call it as midgut. Now, what is the question in the EAMCET? What is the longest straight part? What is the longest straight part? The answer is the midgut. Now, this is posterior part of midgut guarded by muscle sphincter. The midgut is followed by hindgut. In the hindgut, the first part we call it as ileum. It is short. Now, the next part is elongated and coiled. That one we call it as colon. Now, this is a sac-like part that we call it as rectum. It opens out through anus. Now, we observe the question. What is the long coiled part of hindgut? One option is ileum. The second option is colon. Third is rectum. Fourth one anus. Now, in the hindgut, what is the elongated and coiled part? Colon. And now, the colon can be compared to that of the large intestine of vertebrates. The rectum also compared to that of the large intestine of vertebrates. What about the ileum? We know very well in the small intestine, the duodenum and ileum parts are present. Now here, the ileum can be compared to that of the small intestine of vertebrates. Based on this information, what is the long coiled part of hindgut? That we call it as the colon. Now go for the next question. The short, wide part of hindgut. Now, as we observe the hindgut, in the hindgut one part is ileum and the second one we call it as colon and the third one we call it as rectum. Now here what is the question? The short, wide part. Now as we observe the ileum, it is small and narrow, whereas colon it is elongated and coiled. What about the rectum? The rectum is short, wide and sac-like. Now as we observe the rectum, on the wall of rectum, 6 longitudinal foldings are present. They are called the rectal papillae. Now, the rectal papillae and all parts of hindgut are derived from which germ layer? The ectoderm. Now, based on this information, what is the answer? The short wide part of hindgut, that we call it as the rectum. Now, the next question. Efferent salivary duct opens at the base of. Now, as we observe the digestive glands of cockroach, one type of digestive glands we call it as salivary glands. Now, as we observe the salivary glands, in the salivary glands, one pair of sacs are present. They are called receptacles. Number of receptacles 2. From each receptacle, a duct arises. This is called the receptacular duct. Number of receptacular ducts 2. Now these 2 are united and continue as common receptacular duct. It is 1 in number. Now this part we call it as the gland, and this is another gland. Now as we observe the gland, in each gland how many lobes are present? The 2 lobes are present. Now from each gland a duct arises, that we call it as glandular duct. Now this is called the glandular duct. Now number of glandular ducts, the 2. These 2 are united as median salivary duct. This is median salivary duct. Number of median salivary duct, that is 1. Now the median salivary duct opens into common receptacular duct. Median salivary duct, common receptacular duct continue as efferent salivary duct. The number is 1. The efferent salivary duct opens at the base of hypopharynx. What is the other name of hypopharynx? The tongue or supralingua. Now, here regarding the question, efferent salivary gland duct opens at the base of, one is mandibles, second one hypopharynx or tongue or supralingua, third one labrum, and the fourth one labium. Now you observe the diagram. Efferent salivary duct opens at the base of hypopharynx. And now as we observe the salivary glands, in the receptacles the saliva is stored. From the receptacles the saliva enter into receptacular ducts. From there he enter into common receptacular duct. From there he enters into efferent salivary duct. Finally the saliva enters into hypopharynx. The food materials combined with saliva or mixed with saliva, we are getting the soft food material. Such soft food material we call it as bolus. Now we go for the next question. Efferent salivary duct is, or efferent salivary duct in cockroach is formed by. The question already we discussed. The efferent salivary duct is formed by, first option, the median salivary duct, common receptacular duct. Now you have to observe, this is median salivary duct, common receptacular duct. The median salivary duct and common receptacular duct unite and continue as efferent salivary duct. These 2 are receptacles. From each receptacle, receptacular duct arises. They are 2 in number. Receptacular ducts unite as common receptacular duct, 1 in number. From each gland, glandular duct arises. Number of glandular ducts 2. They unite to form median salivary duct. Its number is 1. The median salivary duct, common receptacular duct continue forward as efferent salivary duct. Based on this information, what is the answer for this question? Efferent salivary duct in cockroach is formed by one median salivary duct and one common receptacular duct. Now we go for the next question. The function of cells of hepatic CK. Now as we observe the hepatic CK, now this part we call it as the foregut. What is the other name of foregut? The stomodium. Now the second part of alimentary canal we call it as midgut. The foregut ends as the stomodial wall. Now in between posterior part of foregut and anterior part of midgut, what are present? The hepatic CK are present. Now these are called the hepatic CK. The hepatic CK open into the midgut. Now these are also called the midgut CK. Now the hepatic CK are derived from the endoderm. How many hepatic CK are present? 6 to 8. How they are? They are finger-like. Now as we observe the hepatic CK, these are believed to be digestive glands. The hepatic CK help to secrete enzymes as well as absorb digested food materials. Now here the question is, what is the function of cells of hepatic CK? One is, their function is not known. Rendu. Second one, the digestion and absorption of some food. Third, secrete peritrophic membrane. Fourth one, secrete lipase. Now as we observe the hepatic CK, the hepatic CK secrete enzymes, they help in digestion. After completing the digestion, the digested food materials absorbed by hepatic CK. So that what is the answer for this question? The second one, digestion and absorption. Now the next question. The number of valves in the alimentary canal of cockroach. It is a repeated main EAMCET bit. Now number of valves in the alimentary canal of cockroach. Now this part we call it as mouth. The mouth opens into pharynx. The pharynx opens into esophagus. The esophagus opens into the crop. The crop opens into the gizzard. The gizzard continues as the stomodial wall. Now this part we call it as the midgut. Now this is the posterior part of midgut is guarded by a muscle sphincter. Now as we observe the alimentary canal, in the alimentary canal how many valves are present? Number of valves 1. How many sphincters are present? 1. Now as we observe the stomodial wall, the stomodial wall allows the food materials from foregut to the midgut but prevents the backward movement. At the same time, the stomodial wall allows the enzymes from midgut to foregut. Now here enzymes, again it is repeated. What are the functions of the stomodial wall? The stomodial wall allows food material from foregut to midgut, does not allow backward movement, but the stomodial wall allows the enzymes from midgut to hindgut by a process called regurgitation. By a process called regurgitation. While explaining the liquid food materials, we have to use regurgitation. While explaining the movement of solid food materials, we use the reverse peristalsis. Now from midgut to foregut, the enzymes enter into foregut with the help of stomodial wall by a process called regurgitation. Now Here the question is the number of valves in the alimentary canal of cockroach, that is only 1. Now we go for the next question. The enzyme invertase secreted from. Now the enzyme invertase secreted from. Now as we observe the invertase, what is the other name of invertase? Sucrase. Now as we observe the sucrase converts the sucrose into glucose and fructose. One sucrose molecule converted into one glucose and fructose. It is a disaccharide. Now the star mark indicates that is a disaccharide. Now these are the monosaccharides. The disaccharide sucrose is digested by sucrase. It is also called invertase. Now our question is the invertase is secreted by. Now this part we call it as the midgut. Now this is anterior part of midgut, posterior part of midgut. Now in the anterior part is called the secretory part. Now the posterior part is called absorptive. Now as we observe the anterior part, here the cells are present. They are called endodermal gland cells. The endodermal gland cells which are present in the anterior part of midgut, they secrete one enzyme, we call it as the protease. The second enzyme we call it as the lipase. And the third one we call it as sucrase. What is the other name of sucrase? Invertase. Now based on this information, we go for the answer. The enzyme invertase secreted from. One is the glandular cells of midgut. Second acinar. Third both 1 and 2. Fourth absent. But here the answer is glandular cells of midgut. What type of glandular cells? Endodermal gland cells. Now go for the next question. The structures of alimentary canal are not concerned with digestion process. The structures of alimentary canal are not concerned with the digestion process. Now as we observe the alimentary canal of cockroach, this part we call it as the mouth. In the mouth, no digestion. The star mark indicates no digestion. Now this part we call it as pharynx. In the pharynx, no digestion. Now this part esophagus. In the esophagus, no digestion. Now this part we call it as the crop. In the crop, the digestion takes place. Almost all digestion takes place in the crop. Now this part we call it as gizzard. In the gizzard, food materials are grinding and filtering. So digestion, mechanical digestion concerned with gizzard. Now this part is called the midgut. In the midgut, the digestion takes place. Now this part we call it as ileum, and this part we call it as colon, and this part we call it as rectum and anus. Now as we observe the hindgut, this part we call it as hindgut. In the hindgut, the symbiotic bacteria present. The symbiotic bacteria present in the hindgut secrete an enzyme called cellulase that helps in the digestion of cellulose. Now based on this information, we have to observe the options. One is hepatic CK. The hepatic CK concerned with digestion and absorption. The second one, midgut. In the midgut, digestion and absorption takes place. Third one, Malpighian tubules. The Malpighian tubules are connected to alimentary canal. As we observe the Malpighian tubules, they are excretory organs. So in the Malpighian tubules, there is no question of digestion. What about the crop? In the crop, almost all digestion is going to complete. So that For this question, the answer is Malpighian tubules because they are excretory organs. Now go for the next question. The enzymes secreted by acinar cells of salivary glands. Now what is the enzyme secreted by acinar cells? Now as we observe the salivary glands, this one we call it as the glands. This is one gland, this is another gland. Number of glands 2. In each gland how many lobes are present? 2 lobes. The total number of lobes 4. Now as we observe, in each lobe what are present? The acini are present. In each acini what are present? The acinar cells are present. What is the other name of acinar cells? The zymogen cells. Now these acinar cells secrete the saliva. These acinar cells also secrete amylase. Now amylase is secreted by acinar cells. What is the function of amylase? That helps in the digestion of starch. Now based on this information, the enzymes secreted by acinar cells of salivary glands digest. One is starch, lipoproteins, proteins of food material, lipids of food material. The answer is the starch. The amylase digests the starch. It is an example of polysaccharide. What are the examples for the polysaccharide? One is starch, one is cellulose. Now go for the next question. Assertion. Cockroach expels or excretes the feces in the form of dry pellets. Again repeating. The cockroach excretes or releases the fecal matter or feces in the form of dry pellets. Now this is the correct reason. The rectum of cockroach is with rectal papillae. Now as we observe the reason, in the hind gut, one part we call it as ileum. The second part we call it as the colon. The third part we call it as rectum. Now this entire part we call it as hind gut. What is the other name of hind gut? The proctodium. Now as we observe the hind gut is lined inside by chitinous cuticle. All parts of hind gut are derived from the ectoderm. Now as we observe the wall of rectum consisting 6 longitudinal foldings. These are 6 longitudinal foldings. They are called the rectal papillae. Now after completing the digestion, the undigested food material enters the rectum. The rectal papillae reabsorb water from the undigested food materials so that the animal conserve water. In order to conserve water, the cockroach or all insects excrete or expels the feces or fecal matter in the form of dry pellets. So that A and R, correct? R explains the A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. Alimentary canal of cockroach is involved in the conservation of water. The last question is slightly changed. Assertion. The alimentary canal of cockroach is involved in the conservation of water. Second one. The rectal papillae are concerned with the reabsorption of water. Now, after completing the process of digestion, the undigested food material enters into rectum. The wall of rectum has the rectal papillae. The rectal papillae reabsorb the water from the undigested food materials. This is one of the adaptations adapted to the terrestrial environment. Among invertebrates, among invertebrates, the arthropoda members, among invertebrates, arthropods are successfully adapted to terrestrial environment, because in the body of arthropoda to conserve water so many adaptations are present. One is chitinous cuticle, second one spiracles, third one open type of circulatory system, fourth one Malphizian tubules, fifth one the tracheal system, and the sixth one is the presence of rectal papillae. Now based on this information, A and R are correct. R explains the A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. Uricotelism is a water conservation adaptation of all insects. Now, as we observe the classification of phylum Arthropoda, one class we call it as Insecta. What is the other name of Insecta? Hexapoda. Now, as we observe the class Insecta, all insects excrete the uric acid. What type of uric acid they excrete? Hypertonic uric acid. That means in the uric acid, the water is very small. In order to conserve the water, all insects excrete what type of uric acid? Hypertonic uric acid. So that these are called uricotelic. Why they excrete hypertonic uric acid? Because in their body, from the excretory material, in order to reabsorb the water, what are present? The rectal papillae are present. They help to reabsorb water from the undigested food material. After reabsorption of water, such undigested food material expelled out in the form of hypertonic uric acid. Now based on this information, assertion, Uricotelism is a water conservation adaptation of all insects. So they are called uricotelic. Reason, uric acid is excreted with minimum water loss, so that they conserve water, so that they are adapted to terrestrial environment. Both are correct. R explains A. Now go for the next question. Assertion. In cockroach, no digestive enzymes is secreted in crop. Again it is repeating. In cockroach, no digestive enzymes secreted in the crop. Yet, most of the digestion occurs in the crop. Now, as we observe the foregut of cockroach, this part we call it as mouth, and this one we call it as pharynx, and this part is called esophagus, and this one we call it as crop. Now, what are the asking questions regarding the foregut? In the alimentary canal, what is the largest part? The crop. What is the shape of crop? The pear shape. Whenever food materials are absent in the crop, the walls of crop are folded. Whenever food materials present in the crop, it is dilated. Now as we observe the functions of crop, for some time the food materials will be stored. In the crop, almost all digestion is going to complete. But in the crop, no enzymes. How the digestion is going to complete? Now this part we call it as gizzard. This one we call it as stomodial wall. And this part we call it as the midgut. In the midgut, this part we call it as anterior part. In the anterior part, endodermal gland cells are present. They secrete the enzymes. Now, from the midgut, with the help of stomodial wall, the enzymes enter into crop, by a process called regurgitation. So that in the crop, though enzymes are absent from the midgut by regurgitation, the enzymes enter into the crop. So in the crop, almost all digestion is going to complete. Now the assertion, in cockroach, no digestive enzyme is secreted in crop, but or yet most of the digestion occurs in the crop. It is correct. Reason, in cockroach, enzymes are regurgitated into crop from the mesenteron. What is the other name of mesenteron? The midgut. So that based on this information, both are correct or explains A. Now we go for the next question. Trachea of cockroach open outside by. Now, as we observe the respiratory system of insects, in almost all insects, what are the respiratory organs? That we call it as trachea. Now, as we observe the trachea, they are derived from the ectoderm. How the trachea are formed? Because of the invagination of body wall or invagination of ectoderm. Now as we observe the trachea, this part we call it as the spiracle, or it is also called the stomata. Now the spiracle opens into a short tube called atrium. From the atrium, the trachea is going to start. Now, as we observe the trachea open on the body surface with the help of the spiracles. Now, what is the question? The trachea of cockroach open outside by. One is peritoneum. Now we are getting a doubt. This part we call it as the spiracle. The spiracle is guarded by a round sclerite, that we call it as peritoneum. What is the function of peritoneum? The peritoneum prevents the collapsing of spiracle. Now, the second one, paraprox. The third one, tentorium. What are the paraprox? As we observe the body of cockroach, this is the 10th tergal plate. Here the T represents tergal plate. As we observe the 10th tergal plate, the 10th tergal plate has a notch in the center. On either side of 10th tergal plate, what are present? The paraprox are present. In between paraprox, below 10th tergal plate, what is present? The anus. Third one, tentorium. What is the tentorium? It is apodyme or endoskeleton, gives protection to the brain. Now, what is the answer for this question? The spiracles. Now, we go for the next question. The thoracic segment without stigmata. What is the other name of stigmata? Now, in the body of insect, what are present? The spiracles. The spiracles are also called stomata. They are also called stigmata. Now, what is the popular word for other name of spiracle? The stigmata. In the body of cockroach, how many spiracles are present? 10 spiracles. The first two pairs are present in the thoracic region. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. That means remaining 8 pairs are present in the abdomen. Now, this part we call it as the thorax. Now, as we observe the thorax, this is called prothorax, this is mesothorax, this is metathorax. Now, this part we call it as abdomen. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. Now, this part we call it as the neck, and this part we call it as the head region. Now, in the mesothorax, the spiracle is present. Metathorax, spiracles present. In the first 8 abdominal segments, what are present? the spiracles are present. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, in the body of cockroach, where spiracles are absent? In the head region, in the neck region, in the prothorax, in the 9th abdominal segment, in the 10th abdominal segment. Based on this information, the thoracic segment without spiracles, one is prothorax, second meso, third meta, fourth, all are with spiracles. The correct answer is the prothorax because it is the part of thorax. Now we go for the next question. All tracheal branches entering into an organ and end in. One is atrium, one is spiracle, one is coelom and tracheal cell. Now, as we observe the tracheal system, this part we call it as spiracle, we know very well. The spiracle opens into a short tube called atrium. The atrium opens into this one we call it as trachea. The trachea starting from atrium. What is the junction between spiracle and trachea? That is atrium. Now, all trachea, this is one trachea. The trachea ends in tracheal cell. This is a cell. In the cell, what is present? CY means cytoplasm. And what is present? N means nucleus. Now, from the tracheal cell, what will arise? The tracheoles. Now, in the body of cockroach, each trachea ends with tracheal cell. From the tracheal cell, tracheoles will arise. So that tracheoles derived from tracheal cell, so called intracellular. The trachea ends as tracheal cell. Now observe the question. All trachea entering into an organ and end in. One is atrium, spiracle, coelom and tracheal cell. The answer is tracheal cell. Now go for the next question. Abdominal segments of cockroach which do not show ganglia are. Again repeating the question. Abdominal segments of cockroach which do not show ganglia. These questions are repeating in the main EAMCET examination. Now as we observe the nervous system of cockroach, this part we call it as the head region. And this part we call it as the thorax. And this part we call it as abdomen. First abdominal segment, second abdominal, third, fourth abdominal, fifth, sixth abdominal, seventh, eighth, ninth and 10th abdominal segment. Now this part is called thorax. In the thorax, prothorax, mesothorax and metathorax. Now as we observe the head region, in the head region what is present? A trilobed brain. Now in the head region, subesophageal ganglion. The brain and subesophageal ganglion connected by circumesophageal connectivities. This is the nerve ring, NR, nerve ring. Now in the insect's body, the nerve ring is present around esophagus and in the head region. Now from the subesophageal ganglion, what will arise? The double ventral solid nerve cord arises. The double ventral solid nerve cord extending up to 7th abdominal segment. In each segment, the nerve cords are connected by ganglia, prothoracic ganglia, mesothoracic ganglia, metathoracic ganglia. Now in the thoracic region, how many ganglia? 3. Now as we observe the abdomen, first abdominal ganglia, second abdominal ganglia, third abdominal ganglia, fourth abdominal ganglia, this is the fifth abdominal ganglia and this is the largest sixth abdominal ganglia. Now here what is the question? The abdominal segments of cockroach which do not show ganglia. Now in the 5th abdominal segment, no ganglia. In the 8th abdominal segment, no ganglia. In the 9th abdominal segment, no ganglia. In the 10th abdominal segment, no ganglia. Now the answer is 5th, 8th, 9th, 10th abdominal segments. Now we move for the next question. Main motor center in the body of cockroach. Now again, as we observe the nervous system of cockroach, in the head region, on the ventral side of esophagus, what is present? This one we call it as the sub-esophageal ganglion. Now you have to observe the subesophageal ganglion. This is subesophageal ganglion. It is formed by 3 pairs of ganglia. Now these are called the mandibular ganglia. These are called the labial ganglia. And these are called the maxillary ganglia. Again it is repeating. As we observe the subesophageal ganglion, it is formed by the fusion of 3 pairs. Now this one we call it as the mandibular ganglia. And this one we call it as the maxillary ganglia. And this one we call it as the labial ganglia. By the fusion of these 3 pairs, we are getting subesophageal ganglion. This is main motor center. Under its control, all motor activities are present. Now what is the correct answer for this question? One is supraesophageal, second subesophageal. So the answer is subesophageal ganglion.